The crystal gems in Steven Universe are not what you think. So, are they aliens? Robots? Just plain old rocks? Well, you're not gonna believe the real-world science behind these best buds, and worst of all, if the crystal gems were real, our boy Steven Universe shouldn't even be alive. Hello Internet! Welcome to Film Theory, the show that knows that if every pork chop were perfect, we wouldn't have hot dogs. And if you don't know what that little nugget of wisdom is all about, then you've been missing out on the whimsical world that is Steven Universe.
Now they're ready for this! Get it!
In case you haven't seen this 20-teens Cartoon Network classic, Steven Universe follows the fantastical adventures of a boy named, well, Steven Universe. Steven lives in a quiet beach town with his three cool alien guardians, Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl, collectively known as the Crystal Gems. Get it? Because they're all named after... Anyway. Throughout the series, Steven and the Gems go on wacky adventures, discover a lot about themselves and each other, and in the end, as the theme song puts it, they always save the day. So, Steven Universe is one of those shows that I've always seen around, but never actually had the time to sit down and watch. My friend Ryder from Foot of a Ferret was an evangelist for this show and always told me it was worth it. And now that I'm the film theorist, I've finally had the time to actually justify sitting down to watch this series, and I gotta say, I was blown away. 1 minute, this show is a totally unserious comedy.
Have you seen a gem shard anywhere? It's very important.
No, have you seen my pants? They're also very important.
And then the next, I'm feeling all the feels.
I never asked for it to be this way. I never asked to be made.
And after laughing and crying, I just knew we had to do a theory on it. And thankfully, there's a lot here. For example, while the plot of this series itself is pretty self-explanatory, there was one part of this franchise that did feel a bit confusing for my theorist brain. The crystal gems themselves. Like, what are they? How do their bodies work? They don't need to eat, but they do like to sometimes? If they're hurt really badly, they poof back into their gems like a Pokeball. Heck, series creator Rebecca Sugar even once called them solar-powered robots, but they don't seem super robotic to me. It's got me like Seinfeld over here asking, what's the deal with the crystal gems? Well, as it turns out, the answer to what the crystal gems actually are is in the series, but I needed to gather a bunch of lore bits scattered across the entire franchise in order to find it.
Give him the bits. The bits. The bits.
The bits! The bits!
But once I uncovered what the crystal gems really were, I ended up coming to a shocking conclusion. If the crystal gems really are what I think they are, Steven Universe, the boy, not the show, shouldn't even exist. So hold on to that bag of fry bits real tight, loyal theorists, as we piece together the true biology hidden inside of the crystal gems.
Ah, my bits!
So best to start off at the very beginning. Yeah, where exactly do the crystal gems come from? Well, they aren't born like you or me, per se. No, instead, it's more accurate to say that they're made. According to a series of videos on the official Cartoon Network YouTube channel, making gems is a 3-step process.
When a mommy gem and a daddy gem love each other very much. Psych!
Yeah, no, this isn't one of those shows. Step 1, large machines called injectors come to a planet and, well, inject some goop into the ground. Step 2, a gem is newly formed and saps energy from the environment around it. This is very bad for the planet they're sucking the energy from, but that's neither here nor there. Step 3, boom, out comes a fully formed crystal gem body ready to kick butt at a moment's notice. Now, that's all cool, but outside of the whole sucking energy out of the planet thing, this actually isn't too far from how actual real gems and crystals are made out here in our normal, boring universe. For example, let's take amethyst, the real version of it, that is. Amethysts are formed in what are known as hydrothermal veins. These are big fractures in the Earth's crust that are filled with hot, mineral-rich fluids. Sounds a little bit like the injectors putting that goop into the ground, doesn't it? Among these minerals is silicon dioxide, aka quartz. Through a bunch of geological processes, these quartz particles get packed together and form large, crystalline structures. And if that quartz has trace elements like iron and manganese, then it can cause that normal, colorless quartz to turn purple. My favorite color, by the way. We then call this newly formed gem amethyst, though this rock is a lot less ready to do some butt kicking. Though if butt kicking is what you're looking for, then I think you might want to look in another fantasy world. The one for Game of Thrones Kingsroad. Seamless segue into the sponsor lead, just seamless. Game of Thrones Kingsroad is a new open-world action-adventure RPG set in the gritty fantasy world of HBO's series Game of Thrones. This game has an original, branching storyline set during Season 4 of the show that'll have you rubbing shoulders with iconic characters like Jon Snow, Lord Varys, and Roose Bolton in Castle Black, King's Landing, Highgarden, and more. But what really excites a lore nerd like me, Game of Thrones Kingsroad is putting us up against creatures we've only heard about in the books, like ice spiders, unicorns, and griffins, but never seen brought to life. That's so exciting! Game of Thrones Kingsroad is a classic action-adventure RPG where your skill and strategy are what lead you to victory, both in the single-player story and in cooperative multiplayer. Plus, each character and class is going to offer unique weapons, abilities, and skills so you can settle on the type of gameplay that you really click with. And best of all, you can play it anywhere. iOS and Android if you're on the go, or on PC through Steam, all with seamless crossplay so you can pick up the story no matter where you are. I've been a fan of A Song of Ice and Fire for over a decade, and always wanted an immersive open-world RPG set in the Game of Thrones world. So when I first saw Game of Thrones Kingsroad revealed at the Game Awards, I'll have you know that I was ready to take up arms and yell, "King in the North!" Game of Thrones Kingsroad is completely free to play, but with no lame pay-to-win mechanics in it. So if you want to join me in exploring Westeros, click the link in the description to pre-register for the game launching later this year. And early access is also available right now on Steam. Once again, click that link in the description, and thank you to Game of Thrones Kingsroad for sponsoring this theory. Now, let's get back into Steven Universe. So, is that it? Are the crystal gems just rock people? Well, as it turns out, no. And the reason we know this comes down to this right here. Now, just looking at these, you might not be able to tell what they are, but they're actually X-rays of the crystal gems from the show. And I don't know about you, but do you notice anything that's missing here? And by anything, I mean everything. There's nothing here, and that's weird because of how X-rays work. X-ray imaging shoots, well, X-rays, a type of non-visible light, at an object. Depending on how dense that object is, it'll absorb more or less of these X-rays, changing how bright or dark it'll appear in the final image. For example, in a human body, our super dense skeletons absorb way more X-rays than our squishy skin and organs. So, X-rays generally only pick up on the bones and not everything else. If our crystal gems were just really big bodies of super dense rocks, like real garnets or amethysts, they'd be glowing like a Christmas tree here in this X-ray. Instead, the only parts of them that are actually visible are the gemstones embedded in their bodies. And amethysts lunch.
I love eating. Feels weird.
Since most of their bodies are completely invisible on an X-ray, that means that whatever the crystal gems are actually made of must be pretty undense. That's not a real word, but you get it. Thankfully, another one of those Cartoon Network YouTube videos gives us a pretty big hint at what those undense things might be.
Our bodies are actually projections generated by our gemstone. Think of it like a hologram, but with mass.
Or like Jim and the Holograms, am I right? Am I just old for making that reference? Anyway, this means that outside of their gemstones, the bodies of the crystal gems are just kind of like big balls of light. I mean, I do guess that's about as least dense as you can get, so at least it fits earlier what we said about the X-rays. But there's a problem with this whole idea of holograms with mass, and that's the whole with mass part. See, a hologram like what they're talking about here in Steven Universe is just an image created from light, and light is one of the few things in the entire universe that doesn't have mass. So, what's happening here? How is that possible? Well, while light itself doesn't have mass, you can convert light into mass, and vice versa. Light is just a form of energy, and you can convert any energy into mass with what's known as the mass-energy equivalence. You're probably more familiar with this in formula form since it's arguably the most famous formula in all of science. E equals mc squared. And hey, what do you know? But earlier, when we learned that the process of making gems involves them sucking energy out of the environment, this is what they were doing. They're sapping that energy from the world around them so they can convert it into mass to create their humanoid bodies. So the real question here is how much energy are these gems using for these holographic bodies? Well, for that, we actually get to use this famous equation, so let's break it down. Energy, E, equals the mass of the object, m, multiplied by the speed of light, c, squared. Thankfully, the speed of light is a known quantity, around 300 million meters per second, so if we can get the mass of one of the crystal gems, we can calculate the amount of energy they would have needed to harvest from the Earth to create their humanoid body. Unfortunately, we don't ever really get any specifics in the series about how much they weigh. We're never explicitly told, so we're gonna have to use some of our old school patented theorist math. Let's use garnet as our our example, shall we? In the sequel series, we're told that Steven is 5'6", or about 168 centimeters tall. Using this promotional poster for the new series and our old pal pixel measurements, we can then figure out that Garnet would therefore be 7'1", or about 216 centimeters tall.
A giant woman.
7'1" is obviously very tall for a woman. In fact, that would mean Garnet would be as tall as the tallest currently living woman in the entire world, Rumesa Gelgi. Gelgi reportedly weighs about 198 pounds, or about 98 kilos. That feels a bit low for Garnet, so instead let's look at something else to find her mass. The healthy BMI range for someone at 7'1" tall is between 190.1 and 256.9 pounds. If we assume that Garnet is smack dab in the middle of that would mean that her mass would be somewhere around 223.5 pounds, or about 101.3 kilograms. And if we throw that mass into E equals MC squared, we get that the amount of energy in Garnet should be 9 quintillion joules. That's equivalent to the amount of energy put out by the entire global nuclear power industry in an entire year. In fact, that's the amount of energy that hits the entire Earth from the sun every 72 seconds. But, well, something tells me that this space alien rock lady might not weigh the exact same as an average woman of that height. So, what if Garnet was made of, well, Garnet? What if Garnet wanted to be this size but weigh true to her gemstone self? How much energy would that take? Garnet, the gem, has a density approximately 4 times as dense as a human, so that means that a Garnet-sized block of Garnet would weigh 4 times as much as a human version would. That would then quadruple the energy we're talking about here to over 36 quintillion joules. That's the amount of energy that all of humanity consumes in about 3 weeks. 3 weeks! So yeah, to say the gems are siphoning off quite a bit of energy is a bit of an understatement. No wonder they felt the need to apologize.
We understand that gem production was extremely damaging to the Earth, and we deeply regret our involvement in this process.
Alrighty, so far we figured out where the crystal gems came from and what they're made of. The only thing left for us to figure out is, how do they work? As I mentioned before, Steven Universe creator Rebecca Sugar once called the gems solar-powered robots. On the surface of things, that would make you assume that under the hood, the gems are more automaton than human. But that isn't quite right. As we've already pointed out, the gems get their initial power by sucking out energy from the planet that they're on, and then absorbing light that they can then turn into mass and energy. But on top of that, we've seen several instances throughout the series where the gems are subject to very normal, human-like conditions. They can get hurt and die. They cry.
Don't cry, pal.
They can even get food poisoning from very questionable burritos. So clearly they're not literally robots, but they're obviously not like any ordinary form of life either. So what the heck are they? Well, one option could be that they're just another type of life form. One that scientists have theorized about existing for quite some time, a silicon-based life form. See, here on Earth, all life is what is known as carbon-based. That's because basically all of the molecules used to make life as we know it, whether it be DNA or plants or cute adorable cats from internet videos, all use carbon as their backbone. Why does that happen? Well, carbon atoms, unlike other elements like nitrogen or oxygen, are able to make up to 4 bonds with other atoms. Those 4 bonds are necessary if you want to make the sort of complicated molecules that you need to sustain life. But carbon isn't the only element that can make those 4 bonds. Silicon atoms, which is located just below carbon on the periodic table, are also able to make up to 4 bonds with other atoms. That means that, in theory, in molecular theory, life could exist with silicon as its backbone instead of carbon. And remind me, what are real-world gemstones like amethyst and garnet made of? Oh yeah, silicon oxides. And since silicon is also used in the production of computers and electronics, to us, a living being made from silicon would seem like a robot, just like Rebecca Sugar described. Similar enough to feel like life, but different enough to feel alien. Oh, and just a little aside to sort of nip this in the bud, I know that pearls aren't actually silicon-based. They're made from calcium carbonate, so they're based on carbon. That being said, pearls are created in mollusks, so animals like clams and oysters. So if there are any sort of similar creatures that evolved on the homeworld of the crystal gems to have silicon as their molecular backbone, well, those creatures would almost certainly create pearls using silicon instead of carbon. Just wanted to get that out of the way. So, using a bit of in-show lore, a bit of scientific understanding, and a bit of math, we've not only figured out how the crystal gems work, but also how they theoretically could exist. But there is one thing here that's still a bit of a loose end, because there is someone in the show that perhaps shouldn't exist. Steven frickin' Universe himself. Yeah, I mean, the boy might have a difficult time, being alive because Steven isn't a normal human. He's the child of a human father and a gem mother.
Wait, I have a question.
Yes, Steven?
What if a gem is half human?
That's a good question, and the answer is not good, my man, not good. See, just because silicon and carbon-based life could both exist doesn't mean that those two kinds of life would be compatible at all. I mean, heck, just look at the ordinary life here on this planet, all of which is carbon-based. Despite the fact that all life here on Earth uses DNA and uses the same kind of molecules, you can't do stuff like create a cat-dog hybrid, despite what the folks at Nickelodeon want you to believe. And the hybrids that do exist in nature, stuff like mules and ligers, they're often sterile and can't reproduce because of the mismatch between their parents. Now, imagine doing your best to create a stable, living creature with the fundamentally different building blocks in carbon and silicon-based life. I mean, for one, since silicon is lower on the periodic table, it's larger in size than carbon. That means that even if somehow the molecules were as similar as they could possibly be, the size difference would make it almost impossible for the molecules to do their jobs in a human body properly. The fact of the matter is that Steven, as a half-human, half-gem hybrid, probably shouldn't even exist. And if he did exist, who knows what sort of complications would result in trying to mix the genetic code between two completely incompatible species. And you know what? The show knows this. Many times throughout the franchise, especially in the sequel series, we've seen that Steven is unstable. In one episode, for instance, we see Steven start randomly glowing pink and changing sizes at will. And in that same episode, we actually get a look at his X-ray, and it's quite a bit different from the other gems. Obviously, you can see, well, his actual skeleton, but notice anything wrong with it? It's cracked, broken. These are scars from his previous adventures, scars that haven't been able to heal. There's a good chance that the normal healing processes that you or me would have just don't work if you're a mix of carbon and silicon-based life. While the whole story of how Steven's gem mother and human father met is adorable, what they created, their darling baby boy, he's slowly falling apart. And the crystal gems need to recognize this right away and start coming up with solutions fast before Steven wastes away into tiny fry bits. In fact, if they ever bring this franchise back again, I wouldn't be surprised if this was one of the big driving factors for the conflict. But hey, that's just a theory. A film theory. And cut. Up next on Film Theory, the Omnitrix is destroying Bin 10.